Hi, my name is Prüfer and I'm from Tilburg University in the Netherlands. In another video, I have introduced you to the topic of economic governance. In this video, I will present a classification of economic governance institution, which can serve as a starting point to identify the optimal institution for any specific economic governance problem. A few years ago, Scott Maston from the University of Michigan and I developed such a classification for the case of contract enforcement institutions. A very similar typology could be constructed both for the problems of property rights protection and for collective action, the other two major economic governance problems. The problem of contract enforcement can be pictured in a classical prisoner's dilemma. Have a look at this graph. Here you see that a seller and a buyer can both choose whether to cooperate or defect. The critical essence was, and this is a two-sided prisoner's dilemma, such that mutual cooperation would be efficient, but the unique Nash equilibrium would be defection on both sides. The critical question is, how can we move from the defect-defect outcome to a cooperate-cooperate outcome, which is the efficient solution? Now, if you have a look at the figure of classification institutions, which I show you here, you will see 8 boxes in the top row, which contain the names of the available contract enforcement institutions. Below these boxes, we marked how all institutions to the left or to the right of a vertical line share similar characteristics. These institutions are actually ranked from left to right in line with the increasing marginal cost of utilization. Therefore, we start on the left with internal value systems and ask, can this institution shift behavior of the partners to an agreement or a contract in loose terms from defect to cooperate? Notably, when asking these questions, assume no institutional context whatsoever. There is no state, there is no police, there are no friends. If the question can be answered positively by using the transactor's internal value systems, we are done. Great. So if someone has pro-social preferences, she enjoys cooperating with others, for instance, with her kids. In this case, no other, more expensive institution is necessary to achieve mutual cooperation. But under which circumstances is the assumption of pro-social preferences innocent? Actually, in most business transactions where the transactor may not be in love with the other one, we cannot expect that they easily forgo such profits. Hence, internal value systems may not be enough here to reach mutual cooperation. Therefore, we have to move to the right in the figure, considering standard preferences, where individuals are not willing to sacrifice own payoff for the sake of others. Avinash Dixit calls this the switch from a first-party system to a second-party system. The next institution is bilateral repeated interaction. The prisoner's dilemma can be solved by trigger strategies in an application of the classical Folk theorem. This is nothing novel per se. So the Folk theorem says that in a prisoner's dilemma, the equilibrium in an infinitely repeated game can be cooperate-cooperate if the two players are only sufficiently patient. Hence, player A knows that if he defects and exploits player B in this period, player B will defect forever. If player A values the additional payer from defecting once lower than the additional payer from cooperating until eternity, he will rationally cooperate now. Great thing. In the prisoner's dilemma figure, this means that eternal cooperation dominates defecting now and later if earning 3 now and 1 in every later period is valued less than earning 2 every period. But what if two transactors do not meet sufficiently often and hence the threat of stopping future cooperation does not have enough bite? Then we have to move to the right in the figure and include others in a social network to support cooperation. Here, just as in bilateral repeated interaction and in all other communities, watch the top of the figure, information exchange among transactors about the behavior of others is important. Moreover, in most communities it is the shadow of the future and hence the threat of ostracism or boycott that serves as a punishment technology for defectors. In a social network, if player A defects against player B, he faces the risk that B's friends, C and D, learn about A's defection and would defect against A if meeting him in the future. Therefore, when A considers to defect against B, A has to weigh the chances to meet a member of B's network in the future. So B's network size, or B's connectedness, increases B's power to punish A. But what if that network is too small? Then we have to use formal organizations, so third parties with an own identity, to manage the coordination problem of transactors. As long as these organizations act on behalf of their members, we call them associations. Associations come in two shapes. First, as pure information providers, who collect information about business behavior of their members' partners and distribute that information amongst all members, such as credit bureaus, for instance. If this is not sufficient to reach cooperation, the next alternative institution are arbitration agencies. Here, if an association member complains about a partner who allegedly defected, the association sets up an arbitration tribunal that studies the case independently and comes to an independent judgment. The problem of such arbitration tribunals is that the effectiveness of their judgment, for instance that player A has to pay a certain damage payment to player B, depends on the size of the association. This is because if player A does not pay the judgment, the tribunal can only order its members to defect against this player in the future. This is the fundamental problem of private ordering. The effectiveness of private contract enforcement institutions depends on the shadow of the future, which depends on the size of their membership. On the side, the same analysis also applies in international relations, where the players are states which do not want to go to war, so therefore they do not want to use coercion as a punishment means, but only the shadow of the future, and thereby want to enforce certain behavior. Think about issues of the WTO, so the World Trade Organization, or climate protection agreements. Thus, if private ordering using ostracism is ineffective, coercion has to take over as punishment device to achieve mutual cooperation. Watch the figure. Moving towards the right in the figure, as the only private institution that reserves the right to use coercion, we have criminal organizations, such as the mafia. The mafia's problem stems from its setup as a profit-maximizing organization, which leads to exploitative behavior and has strong negative externalities for the rest of society. So, moving further to the right in the figure, this may give rise to the checks and balances that public institutions, court and the police, are subject to. Finally, we distinguish between two types of courts. Specialized courts, where adjudicators are still embedded in communities and receive informal information about litigants, but are also easier to manipulate or corrupt. Examples are business courts, where parts of the judges are business people who have expertise in the trade and who may get informal information about what actually occurred in a given relationship between two litigants. And then we have general courts, which only rely on the law and the information they get in the courthouse. They review whether the burden of proof was taken by one of the litigants and adjudicate based on general standards, and do explicitly not rely on informal information. General courts are the most impartial, but also the most expensive enforcement institution. So, in this video, I have explained a classification of economic governance institutions which can serve as a starting point to identify the optimal institution for any specific economic governance problem. In another video, I present a brief introduction to economic governance that is anterior to this classification. There, I present the three major economic governance problems: property rights protection, contract enforcement, and collective action. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.